Hello. It's on. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So we should get started here. So welcome to this session that is looking at building the climate change, family planning, population, environment, and development nexus. Oh, they can't hear me. You can't hear me? They can hear me because they, yeah, sorry. Including the Minister for Malawi Minister of Forestry and Natural Resources, who will be joining us shortly. There's Dr. Joan Castro, Executive Vice President of Path Foundation in the Philippines. Mr. Gordon Simango, the gentleman on my right here. Elliot, the mic's gone dead again. Oh, it's gone dead. It's better, yeah. All right. Yeah, the gentleman on my right here, Mr. Simango, who is the All Africa Confederation of Churches liaison officer at the African Union in Addis Ababa, and Dr. Paul Disanka, who is the manager in the UNFCCC, who will be joining us shortly as well. And online, we have Dr. Joan Castro, but I think we have to get started. The other couple of speakers will join us. But as I said, we are really examining linkages between reproductive health, population, climate change, the environment, various aspects of the environment, conservation, food security, and biodiversity, to see how these issues are linked to one another and how they affect both the adaptation and the mitigation agenda when we talk about climate change issues. It's important to note that I think if you've gone around this conference and the previous COP meetings, the word population, or what I call the P word, seems to be a forbidden word in some ways. People don't want to talk about it that much, yet the various aspects of population change, starting with population growth itself, looking at how the numbers will grow in population, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, which will account for over 70% of all global population growth for the rest of this century. But other aspects of population growth as well, population change, including migration, forced and voluntary migration, on age structure changes, all these have very, very big ramifications, not only on determining how the issues about mitigation will shape up going into the future, but also in affecting the capacity of communities and countries to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So I wanted the reason here is really to look at these issues. Welcome, Honorable Minister. As I was just introducing the topic here, but I would like to welcome in a special way Honorable Nancy Tembo, who is the Minister for Forestry and Natural Resources from Malawi. Welcome, Honorable Minister. So I was just doing this, and we're going to get started here by introducing the panelist who is online now, Dr. Joan Castro, who is the Executive Vice President for Path Foundation Philippines. And I want to get her started by asking her a question to really to get us started by helping us understand when we talk about the population, environment, and development nexus (PED). What do we really mean, and why is this important? So, Joan, if you come up and get us started where you are. Joan is in the Philippines. She couldn't join us. Yeah. Hi, Joan.
Hi, thank you, Elia. Can you hear?
Go ahead, you have the floor now. Please just try to explain to us why is this issue important, and yeah, take it from there.
Okay. Greetings to my distinguished co-panelists first and everyone joining us today. So the PED nexus is also called the PHE approach. It places particular emphasis on the population and environment sectors, but it is also amenable to other sectors like agriculture, education, water, clean energy, and others. The underlying philosophy is fundamentally a deliberate effort to integrate and collaborate in order to create synergy and attain value-added results. The PED approach actually applies a systems thinking framework to analyze and respond to the environmental conditions by understanding the human needs that influence the behaviors and activities on the state of people and the environment. Integrated approach also factors in demographic changes and characteristics such as population size, growth, migration patterns, spatial distribution, age structure, birth and death rates, and the effects of climate change and the pandemic, plus other factors that pose threats to improving human and ecosystems resilience, well-being, and sustainable development. So in order to institute appropriate mitigation and adaptation measures that are holistic and comprehensive, such as the PED integrated approach, it is key for policy and decision makers and for program planners to understand the context and the multi-directional interactions between the sectors, and for this matter, primarily population and environment sectors. Over to you, Leah.
You're building on that. You've worked for many years in promoting really this integrated approach, how to get family planning, reproductive health, really integrated in environment and climate change programs. Can you give us a specific example of an initiative that you've worked on, and what really came out of that, what impact this initiative had, briefly, please?
Okay, so let me share with you some initiatives that employ the PED approach. Firstly is the Integrated Population and Coastal Resource Management Initiative, otherwise known as IPOP-CORM, implemented in the Philippines in early 2000. It's a pioneering PED approach program with a goal to improve food security and quality of life of communities that depend upon coastal resources while maintaining biological diversity and productivity of coastal ecosystems. The PED approach was informed by recognizing the declining productivity of the coral reefs, threatening food security and health of the communities. There were surveys that were done in the area that revealed high levels of fertility, population growth and momentum, migration, childhood malnutrition, poverty and chronic insecurity, food insecurity. Analysis of the interconnected dynamics of population and environment informed a holistic PED approach by integrating coastal management as a strategy for food security and family planning as strategic intervention to reduce fishing efforts and population pressures in the areas that we were in. The project resulted in improved coral and mangrove conditions and family planning and reproductive health outcomes, and we gained policymaker support in more than 30 communities. And at the end of the project, we had a constituency of peer educators and community-based distributors that were operational. There were about more than 50 policies passed, and fisherfolk organizations, people's organizations, and non-government organizations capacitated on PED approach. The same project actually also provided the evidence that integrated approaches generate higher impact than sectoral approaches. And the paper was published sometime in 2010. The best practices of the IPOP-CORM was replicated in a global project called Balance in late 2000 to promote the PED approach. And it was jointly implemented by conservation, health, and academic institutions, namely the Coastal Resource Center of the University of Rhode Island, Conservation International, and my organization, Path Foundation Philippines, with support from USAID, both offices of population and reproductive health and environment. Across the project areas, the balance built PED capacity in 21 organizations working in marine, agriculture, watershed, forest conservation in 8 biodiversity-rich countries in East Africa and Asia Pacific, where population change is dynamic and climate change is a serious concern and impacting the lives, loss and damage of key infrastructures, inequities, and food insecurity in various degrees. The PED approach also gained champions among our key environmentalists, conservationists, and I'd like to mention a special person, Dr. Angel Alcala, a recognized scientist, a Pew Fellow, a previous minister of the Philippines Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and the father of marine protected area management. He espoused and promoted the PED approach, he believed that meeting the unmet family planning and reproductive health needs of women in tandem with coastal resource management is a best practice. So our lessons across the countries and ecosystems were consistent. PED approach is essential to assure sustainability of conservation gains and resiliency. PED approach contributes to greater female and youth involvement in environmental actions and stewardship. And there is no downside to PED approach. It is described as a practical solution to interrelated issues and relates to the way of life of the communities and aligns with the visions of the policymakers that we work with. Thank you. Over to you, William.
Thank you, Joanne, for that. And I think what is clear from what you are saying is that these PD approaches operate well when there's an intervention, both at policy strategy level in terms of government guiding this, but also building capacity at community level of where the actual action is. So Joanne, I'll come back to you a bit later as we go in this, as we continue with this conversation. But for now, I would really like to turn to the Honorable Minister for Malawi, Honorable, hello, yeah, Honorable Nancy Tembo. Honorable Nancy Tembo is an MP and as I said, the Minister responsible for forestry and natural resources in Malawi. She's really, I was joking with her yesterday that if we look at ministers at this conference who have spoken the most, that she might get an award. I'm always seeing her 2-3 times in all sorts of conversations here. And she's really a big champion in Malawi on issues with to do with reforestation, banning of plastic papers in the country. She's also championing reforestation, charcoal substitution, and how to get a sustainable potable water. So Honorable Tembo is going to open up by giving a statement, and then after she gives that statement, I'll ask her 1 or 2 questions just to get a few insights on what she's going to say. Honorable Tembo, over to you.
Can you hear me? Good, thank you. Oh, well, good morning, everybody, and very happy to join you this morning for these conversations on building climate change, family planning, population environment, and development nexus. I'm going to address you here today on the case study of Malawi. Malawi is a highly populated country. We are a very highly vulnerable country to the impacts of climate change and weather-related disasters. This is mainly due to our location. We are a landlocked country in the Rift Valley of Africa, heavily reliant on rain-fed agriculture, and we have a rapid population growth, rapid urbanization, and settlements that are not really, they're really haphazard settlements, and poor economic status and environmental degradation. And you can see that this is a recipe for disaster on our part. The World Bank ranks Malawi among the top countries, 10 countries in Africa, heavily exposed to climate change effects. Research done by AFIDEP categorizes Malawi amongst the 14 African countries that are population and climate change hotspots because they are highly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of rapid population growth and climate change, including acute water shortage. In 1919, Malawi experienced one of its worst cyclones. This cyclone killed over 60 people, but the damage it caused was vast. It is estimated that for us to recover, we need $370 million just to recover from one disaster. And apart from that, there's various other disasters in between that have come up before we have even recovered from the disaster of the 2019 cyclone. Now, as a government, we've not just sat idle. There is frameworks that we have put in place to ensure that we begin to address these issues. And we've put in place a number of policies and strategies to increase community resilience to climate change effects. However, implementation of these instruments requires financial and related technical resources. The Malawi National Climate Change Policy promotes adaptation, mitigation, technological transfer, and capacity building for sustainable livelihood through green economy. Gender considerations are important in the planning and implementing climate change management programs because girls, women, and children often suffer the most. When disasters such as extreme heat, flood, drought, cyclones happen, girls and women are the most that suffer. And if you get into a situation where, because of desperation, families will marry off their girls early for economic reasons. Disruptions to the provision of sexual and reproductive health services may result in unplanned pregnancies, and displacement of people increases in gender-based violence. And we have experienced this during this period where we've had this, the COVID period, the last 2 years, where a lot of girls have dropped out of school due to pregnancy because of the situations in their homes, and families really desperate to get something from a son-in-law that can provide to fill a gap that is there in a family. Challenges coming as a result of disasters. Malawi's population is so huge that we have often to depend on our landscapes. Malawians have, because of lack of education, most of them have large families. A Malawian woman has an average of 4.2 children in her lifetime. This high fertility stems from low levels of female education, early onset of motherhood, and high rates of unmet need for effective family planning methods. Rapid population growth puts a lot of pressure on land and natural resources. And most of Malawi uses biomass energy for cooking and heating. As you can see, the rate of population growth exceeds economic growth, which affects the government's capacity to fund social and public services. 48% of females meaning girl children, enroll for secondary education. But at the end of 4 years of secondary education, only 7% will complete that 4 years. And the factors that lead to that decline are the ones that I've just cited above. Now, the problem of girls dropping out of school is exacerbated by the effects of climate change. Health is an essential component of Malawi's NDCs for climate change mitigation and adaptation from 2015 to 2050. But health is, can you just help me with this? Just take that, yeah, no, take that one. What page is it? Page 3. Page 3? Okay, can I, yeah. We do not have adequate health facilities for a population that's rapidly growing. Our facilities are really not adequate. The capacity of our population to be resilient to extreme weather events and adapt to socioeconomic changes related to climate change requires knowledge, skills, and resources. And all these you can see are in very short supply. Now, what is required to be done? What we must do is to ensure that gender and population dynamics are at the center of climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies to offset the growing pressure on natural resources and degradation of the environment. This requires us to invest in education, to reduce the gender gaps, to be able to plan for our urban growth, and to provide finances to ensure that those who need family planning services can access them. An integrated approach to doing development is essential. There are linkages in sectors of development with population and the environment. A high population growth will impact on the environment negatively. And so issues of population need to be at the center of mitigation and adaptation. We must develop and strengthen intersectoral partnership that acknowledge the interdependence to achieve complementarity in addressing climate change vulnerability. Finally, we must strengthen the resilience of the health sector to climate change related shocks through infrastructure development and capacity building. And just to add on to that is that climate change in our country is impacted. I think our ability to address issues of climate change are impacted by our inability to ensure that we have a populace that is skilled, that is educated, especially at the community level, where women provide for families. Most households at communities are headed by women, and they're not able to provide for their families because of limited access to education, to health, but also to fuel, wood. And therefore, they resort to the landscapes and forestry in order, one, to gain their livelihoods, but also to make sure that they are able to provide for food for their families. So this nexus that we are discussing today is very critical. And I hope that all the conversations here at the COP can address the issue of population, because unless we address issues of reproductive health, unless we address issues of population growth, we will not be able to achieve anything. So all we're doing will be in vain. And I'm glad that here you have decided to address these issues, because as you said, I've been in most of these conversations, but this population issue has not been addressed, and we can't do anything unless we address population growth. Thank you.
Right. You can hear it for yourself, Honorable Minister. I think you've articulated the issues so well. And I wanted to ask you even a question on why the government, because when you look at the climate change policy, the population policy, there are issues of environment in the population policy, of climate change. In the environment policy, you talk about population. In the broader vision 2063 that the government just came up with, you talk about both issues as being central for achievement of this socioeconomic transformation agenda for the country. So I think you've already said it. My other question, I just wanted to say, why is this important? I think you've answered that. But I think part of what the government of Malawi, when the president was here, you were talking about climate justice, and the president talked about, okay, either the North needs to pay up. But I think what you seem to be saying here, and maybe you can comment a little bit more, is on why even Southern countries, African countries, need to play a very, very proactive role themselves as well. If you can maybe just add to that.
Yes, indeed. I think our president was correct. The North needs to pay up. Climate change really has been caused largely by the North. Our contribution to that is really negligible, but we also cannot sit idle and not do anything about it. And I think some of the degradation that has taken place within our countries has been as a result of our own inability to address issues. So we also have a responsibility. I'm talking about issues of population growth. Governments have to take responsibility. We have to ensure that we provide for services that address issues of population growth. We have to sensitize communities. We have to engage communities on issues and the negative issues that families will encounter if they do not address the issue of population growth. We have a big role to play. We have to ensure we restore our landscapes. This is not, the North is not going to come and restore. We have to have policies that are in place to enable whatever financial support we get, those programs should be in place. So we cannot sit back. We have to do something. Issues of girls' education, we have to ensure that we provide for the environment for a girl to enable the girl to go to school. So yes, the North has a responsibility, but even countries in the South have a huge responsibility for their population to make sure that there is development that is sustainable, development that makes its own population develop. Because it follows that if you do not send a girl child to school, they will not understand the need to have a smaller family. If a girl child has a big family, or if a family is huge, they will not be able to send their child to school. And if they're not able to send their child to school, that huge family will go back to nature in order to survive. And we will continue to degrade our landscapes. So this nexus has to be addressed. We cannot just sit idle and wait for other countries to do this within our own countries.
All right, thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that. I want now to turn to the gentleman sitting on my right here, who is Mr. Smango. Mr. Smango, as I said when I introduced him at the beginning, he's the director of the All Africa Conference of Churches, and he sits at the liaison office at the African Union in Addis Ababa. He's an experienced and accomplished human rights governance and peace advocacy leader. He really tries, his work has focused on how to bring voices from the underserved, underprivileged people to decision-making tables. So I just wanted to ask you, Mr. Smango, welcome to this discussion, and thanks for accepting to be part of this. This nexus, we're talking about reproductive health, population, environment, climate change, and sustainable development. how do faith-based groups look at this? Is this an important framework that you think needs to be looked at from the perspective of faith-based groups? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elea. I feel very privileged to be here today. And I think some of you might be wondering, what does faith has to do with climate change? What has faith to do with population? And what could be our reason and purpose as faith-based organizations to be present here? And some might think that faith actually could be more of a hindrance to progress somehow. But we're here to share a story as it relates to the question on the nexus, as has been posed to us. You would understand that faiths do not have one common approach or one common understanding of the nexus between population, climate change, and environment. So there's not one specific story to look at. But for us in the All Africa Conference of Churches, just to say that we work in 43 countries in Africa, but we also have 204 members across Africa. So we bring together these members together to look at issues around justice. And as it relates to population and the environment, we use our faith as a resource to begin to enter into this dialogue on the nexus. And so, for example, for us, we are Christians, what we have started doing is actually to read the scriptures with the lens of population, read the scriptures with the lens of climate change and the lens of environment. So one popular verse among Christians that you would hear is what is taken from Genesis 1 verse 28, which says, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." Oftentimes people say that it's a mandate, and it's a biblical mandate, that we have to be fruitful, we have to multiply. But reading the scriptures, it also says that we have to replenish the earth. That's our responsibility. And so sometimes we tend to read the scriptures selectively to suit what we want. Like I read here, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. So it is a responsibility given to human beings. And when God created earth, he rested on the seventh day, seventh day, and looked at what he had done, and behold, it was good. And he gave the responsibility for stewardship to men, because what he had created was good. If we look at what the word replenish means, I mean, there are English people here, you will be able to explain it much better than me. You would have to restore, you would have to restock, you would have to make up, you have to fill up, you have to renew, you have to replace. But sometimes there is selective interpretation of the scriptures. What we are also saying here, one of our main theme as we were coming here, we brought together bishops from, bishops from about 30 countries to reflect on preparing for COP26 in terms of what our key asks would be. And what they recommended for us in the reflections was that we should take this theme, which is the welfare of the earth is our welfare. So if we take care of the earth as humans, the earth would take care of us. So it's a cyclical relationship. And the more we throw waste, the more we throw toxics to Mother Earth. At some point when it throws back to us, I mean, when the earth begins to throw back to us, then we have intensity in droughts, we have very intense cyclones, and we are not able to cope with. So the mandate for us, as we see it in the All Africa Conference of Churches, is to take care of the earth and reading the scriptures in a different way, and also saying that we have a responsibility to replenish the earth, knowing that creation itself, I mean, from what I have just said, it is an expression of God. And when God created the earth, he saw that it was good. And it is our responsibility as human beings to maintain the status quo of what the earth was. If we multiply more and take more from the earth, I think we are going beyond what our call is. And that's the reason why we are interested in the whole issue around the nexus. And for us is to create the dialogue and the spaces, in the sense that we come from different denominations, and we also have sometimes doctrinal differences. But we think it is important for us not to sit on the sidelines, but to create the spaces where we can already begin to have that dialogue.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there specific things that your organization is doing, especially in trying? I saw that you were at the ICPD conference in Nairobi in a big way as well. This is the space where maybe the church has shined. Are there specific things? How do you see this agenda going forward, especially in looking at how this Nexus goes?
Okay. So thank you very much. We have been working since I joined the organization 2 years ago, and I know very well that we were involved in the ICPD conference in Nairobi in 2019. And I know that there was lots of controversy from faith groups and some actually demonstrating around the venues in terms of this is a foreign agenda when you're talking of population. But for us, it's actually an opportunity for us to begin to reflect, what does this mean to us, as opposed to sidelining that. We were coordinating a group of faith groups that were interested in dialogue, and we were even able to come up with our own statement. And so 2-3 things that we use a resource is actually this theology of responsibility and stewardship. And our interpretation of theology is God talk. How do we talk about God when we talk of creation? How do we talk about God when we see the environment? How do we talk about God when we see population and possibly the nexus as well? And also the theology of sustainable families. Like the minister was saying, that the more we are and the more we empower the girl child to be able to control or to be able to have the number of children that they would have decided on, maybe the better it is for an environment. Because the more we are, currently in Africa, we talk of a demographic dividend, and we have so many young people, and we see how many people are drowning in the Mediterranean or trying to cross the Red Sea to go to the Middle East because they don't find opportunities. And what we are saying is that we should be sustainable. We should be able to have what we know that would be able to sustain in terms of our relationship with the environment. We also have, because we think evidence is very, very important, we talk of, we have been facilitating dialogues in terms of trying to say what's the nexus between faith, science, and climate. And just before we came here 2 months ago, we had one dialogue with UNEP, Faith for Earth Initiative, Stockholm Environment Institute, and us as well, trying to say, what is the information, the evidence that is out there that can inform our interpretation of the scriptures is very, very important. We also have taken interest in the AU population policy. They're currently going through a process of coming up with an African Union policy on population. There's no policy at the present moment, but the member states of the African Union have already started a process of discussing population. And we as faith leaders or faith organizations are already participating in that process.
All right, thank you. I think I would like to also just turn to the minister. I think what Mr. Smango just pointed out here, that this is a controversial issue. I think you often hear that it's a foreign agenda, you know, and part of the reason maybe the P word that I talked about, population, is forbidden here, is that people don't want to touch it because it's like a sensitive issue. But I think, as you've heard from the Honorable Minister here, the leaders in the global South in Africa are seeing the visible impacts of rapid population growth, how it's affecting people. And I think if we want to help them, then we need to listen more to what the leaders there are saying rather than box the development agenda. But Honorable Minister, I think you wanted to say something also in reaction to what Mr. Smango here said.
What I wanted to say is that the issue of politics is at the center. Because even us as politicians, we shy away from talking about the population issues and the reproductive issues because we do not want to offend sectors of the church, but also cultural beliefs. And so we will share even here because the politicians are the ones that draw the agenda for this COP26. So even that is not highlighted in the discussions at COP26 because of politics. So and people are looking out for votes. You don't want to lose votes from a certain sector because then you've talked about something that's sensitive for them. But I think what we need to be doing is to begin to sensitize, to work together with faith leaders. And we have in the past, but not to address reproductive issues of the population. Unless we do that, I think we'll just be going round in circles. The faith leaders are critical in this conversation because the citizens listen to the faith leaders. Once they start to highlight their voices, the politicians will follow because the leadership would have been taken by the church. They should now redefine. God did not say we just multiply and not look after the planet. No. So that the other part of that conversation, of that thinking, should be highlighted by the church so that it makes the politicians comfortable to even talk about it. Because we feel that the faith leaders really have a bigger audience than us, and we do not want to offend that audience, the followers of the faith leaders. So we need to now start to engage and sensitize, to work together with, and the faith leaders should take the leadership in this discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And at this point, I think I'll allow for a couple of comments maybe from the audience, but before we do that, I would like to welcome our fourth panelist, Dr. Paul Disanka. He was speaking at another session. The meeting had to be shifted there, but Paul he actually manages the unit that supports national adaptation plans in developing countries, including less developed countries from UNFCCC. And he also manages, the unit also manages the mechanism on loss and damage. And over the last 20 years, he's been supporting adaptation planning under the convention at UNFCCC. And we thought that it would be important in this discussion to bring him on the table here, maybe to speak to a couple of issues. But first of all, welcome, Paul. We're talking about this nexus between population, environment, and development. And so when we did a look at the interconnectedness between climate change and other development issues, whether it's gender, it's population, it's food security, and so on, how should countries in low and middle income countries respond as part of adapting to climate change when there are all these interconnected issues?
Thank you very much, and sincere apologies for being so late to this. That's a very important question. In the early days of adaptation, we used to focus on individual projects where we focus on one solution, one community, etc. But over time, we've very quickly learned that things are very interconnected. It's all about people and their vulnerability and so forth. And any solution does need to recognize how things are interconnected and perhaps develop solutions that address multiple benefits. There's a lot of support now under the convention, several funds, some of them quite big, such as the Green Climate Fund. So it's essentially up to countries to mobilize their communities, local governments, subnational level, etc., to actually put together projects that have significant impact in the long term. I think issues of youth, gender, and so forth, they all need to be interwoven into a solution. I think the days of just saying we'll go plant trees and that's it, that's the solution, count how many trees we planted, I think those days are over. We do need to see how are things connected locally, regionally, globally, and so forth. Adaptation is a very global problem, so it needs solutions that cut across all the scales and stakeholders and so on.
Yeah, and maybe if you can just, thanks a lot, Paul, for that. But maybe if you can just follow on to that, and in terms of part of your work, you help countries to monitor progress. How do you see this agenda moving forward, whether it's in relation to the SDGs, especially when you are looking at these how the countries have to look at the interconnected issues as we are discussing here in terms of a measurement?
That's another $1 million question, my own. I think early on in any project, we count inputs and outputs. How many reports have we produced? How many stakeholders are in a workshop, etc. But very quickly, we are realizing that we don't need to ask deeper questions about how effective are the interventions that are being supported. That requires going a little above a project and an activity. SDGs provide that initial entry point, but we are struggling in the discussions under the convention and the global stocktakes. How do we measure concrete outcomes and results of adaptation efforts? That requires, I think, as I said, looking beyond individual activities to something that captures the essence of what we're trying to achieve. So reducing vulnerability and making communities resilient to climate change, the ability to bounce back. We're not going to ever be able to avoid losses from climate change, but it's how we're able to handle it. So instead of focusing mostly on disaster risk reduction and preemptive actions, we have to think about how do we address losses when they happen? How do local communities recover when their houses get washed away, etc. We have to build that into solutions. So it's not an afterthought or just rely on humanitarian efforts as a charity when it happens. We do need to integrate this into planning.
All right, thank you. So let me just open up to you. I don't know how many people want to say something quickly. We have one here, Robin. Yeah.
So stand up.
Yeah, and I think we can use this for other people.
Can you hear me? Is that good? Thank you so much. And thank you to the WHO for hosting this event. And I just want to say how refreshing it is from all the speakers to hear you talk about the population issue, because it has been a real, as you said earlier, a P word, which nobody quite wanted to say. And I completely get it. And I think the responsibility on the global north to curb consumption and to cut greenhouse gases, that's absolutely the primary driver. But to hear the minister, and thank you, Minister, for being so clear on this, that equally there is a role for countries with high population growth to address that, primarily for the benefits of the women and girls directly. But I heard you say, and I think also earlier, that there is a benefit in terms of biodiversity and climate change longer term, and that benefit will come back to those women and girls in those communities, because they're going to be the ones most hard hit by climate change impacts. And I just really wanted to ask why you think, particularly politicians here, our own politician, let me not say that he's got 7 children, but I think he has and counting, but there is no mention of population in terms of its, not just adaptation, but its contribution and its mitigation of when you have met the unmet need for those hundreds of millions of girls, not only for education, but for safe family planning. And it seems to be a dirty word, but not one that you find difficulty speaking to. So I just wanted to ask you to talk a bit further about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead, Honorable Minister. And Giovanni, maybe, I don't know, there are some people who have joined us online. I don't know if there's anything that people are saying there, if you just want to summarize, or if there's something. If not, yeah, Honorable Minister, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Yeah, like I said earlier, there's not been much said on the population and reproductive health. But for us, we cannot avoid it anymore. We just have to grapple with it and deal with it, because the rapid rate is 4% per annum in Malawi, and it is impacting on the environment. Like people like homes, so the requirement for fields to farm on. It is because of this population growth. It's the main driver of degradation in our country. So for us, we have no option but to deal with it. The challenge I think that we have in Malawi is that we tend, and I think throughout the South, operating in silos. So like he said, we encourage communities to plant trees. We should be now dealing with talking to the Minister of Health. The Minister of Health should be doing their part, the Minister of Education. And I'm glad that now there's that realization, the Minister of Education is here dealing with that. And we are working closely with the Minister of Education to ensure that we embed issues of the environment within the curricula of the Minister of Education. But we have to work with the Ministry of Agriculture for smart agriculture as we're going to go build adaptation, build resilience within communities. We have to work all across. But the way we operate, I think, is we have a budget for our ministry for this year. Let's do the activities. Well, there is no opportunity oftentimes to integrate, to work across sectors in government. And I think that's where we need to start the conversations. How can we integrate all programs within our budgets that lead to safeguarding of our environment? But bottom line, it's the issue of the population. Is it an education populace? Is it a populace that has access to reproductive health services? Is it a populace that has been sensitized on smart agriculture, on issues of the environment? So all these are issues that we need to grapple with, and we need support, but we have to do our bit as well. Thank you.
All right, so I think we have to be wrapping up this, but I'll let you just quickly maybe come in and make it quick if possible. And then I'll ask the speakers just to give us their take-home message, starting with you, Joanne, there online. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for your contributions. I think it's been really fruitful for us, for also lots of food for thought for us. I would just wanted to just highlight one topic that perhaps sometimes it's missing in this kind of discussion. We are quite focusing our discussions on the need for people to be educated and for sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also knowledge and education for people to reduce the number of children, etc. But also we need to take into account that the countries also need to implement social security policies for people to be able not to need to have more children, for them to afterwards to take care of the elderly. So because this is something that is happening in the Western countries, in the global North, so we cannot ask other countries in the global South to do the same if you don't have structures enough to implement social security, strong welfare state structures that takes care of the elderly. So this is something that sometimes it's missing in the discussion. So.
All right, thanks. I think that's well noted. I think if you ask the minister, she can go on and on talking about maybe efforts that are being made. But Joanne, I'd like to bring you in just to kind of give us, in practical terms, what do you think are the most critical things that whether it's governments or other actors need to take into account to operationalize the PED Nexus?
Thank you, Leah. Maybe I just like to premise it by saying that based on experience, the PED approach is complex, but it is doable and build resilient people and ecosystems, especially in lower middle income countries. And if policymakers and other development practitioners acknowledge the PED Nexus as a valuable framework, break silos, and invest in holistic package towards strengthening local capacities, empowering governments and organizations to seek collective results through efficient utilization of scarce resources. And this can be done specifically by creating dialogues and forging and consolidating partnerships between health, climate change, environment, and development actors at all levels on systems thinking, planning, and response. We need also to identify opportunities for integrating the PED package within the country's intended nationally determined contributions and related policies and programs. They also need to invest in a PED package of services that include accessible family planning and reproductive health services as part of climate change compatible development strategies in order to achieve the co-benefits of climate change and management outcomes and health outcomes. So that's my contribution.
All right, thanks a lot, Joanne. And I think we really have to wrap up now. Mr. Smango, your 20-second take-home message coming out of this discussion, if we're wrapping up now.
So my takeaway message is the welfare of the earth is our welfare. And also let's take faith as a resource instead of it being a barrier because of the access that faith communities have to populations. Thank you.
Dr. Disanka, people have said the population factor seems to be forbidden here. You had the UNFCCC. Should people have hope that this will become a key issue in future COP deliberations? Or maybe what's your advice on what needs to be done to reinforce this integrated approach in looking at climate change issues?
Thank you very much. We live, our process is the diplomatic process. So in that sense, it's very country driven. As long as countries continue to push for an item, it will continue to appear on agendas. Issues of population appear actually across many aspects. It's not just about controlling numbers of people, but also reproductive health and how to deal with people when they're displaced due to impacts of climate change. So that's a huge topic. Displacement, migration, either locally, internationally, etc. That we actually have a special expert group, a task force on displacement that deals with this issue. So these issues are there. We just have to look at the details as to how to best benefit from what they're producing. So this is an important topic. It is covered in multiple ways. So let's find ways to build on that and enhance on that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Honorable Minister, maybe just give us the last word and then we are out of here. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you want to comment? Oh, from WHO, okay. Maybe you should go first. I want to give the minister the last word out of protocol.
Yes, thank you so much. So thank you so much for being here. My name is Antonios Kolimenakis. I'm representing the African Regional Office Team for Climate Change and Health. I would just like to comment that even though we are hosting this event, just kindly to let you know that we do not always share the same views of the speaker and participants, and I think this can be well understood and democratic. And just two key messages that I would like to pass is that for us, ensuring access to sexual reproductive health is a human right, and we promote it in adaptation and development context, but not as a mitigation option. So I would just like to leave you with this message from our side. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And I think, yeah, Honorable Minister.
For us, we already are working on issues of reproductive health. We are working with World Health Organization, WHO. We are working with UNICEF. We are working with UNFPA to ensure that we have there is access to reproductive health. Sexuality issues are being discussed as we speak. There's programs, but what we need is more support. All these issues are embedded in our NDCs, and we submitted our NDCs here. We would like to realize what we have submitted. What we require is support, more support. We are getting support from these UN agencies, the ones I've mentioned, but I think more needs to be done. We are suffering. The country is now completely, in my view, we need restoration, massive restoration. And we need to tie these issues, this nexus has to be recognized across all sectors of governments in the LDCs, in Africa. These are issues that we all must champion. And I hope that COP27 will put issues of reproductive health and population at the center of its discussions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think I speak on behalf of all of us here to thank the Honorable Minister for sparing your time and sharing those deep insights to the group here on the really contextual realities that countries, not only Malawi, but other countries are experiencing. Thanks again, Dr. Disanka. Thanks, Dr. Castro online and Mr. Smango. And thanks a lot, everybody, for being part of this discussion. I would just like to note as we finish here that actually this discussion was made possible by a program called BUILD that AFIDEP, where I work, the African Institute for Development Policy, is leading a consortium that includes PACJA, Pan-African Climate Change Justice, lead South and Eastern Africa, led by Professor Chiota here. We have FHI 360 and PFPI in Philippines. And the whole aim is really how to promote uptake of evidence and advocacy to promote the PED nexus in the environment sector. So we hope that this has been a useful discussion, and that from now on, I think what Dr. Disanka said, when we talk about population, it's not just population growth, it's actually population change. We're talking about population change. There's age structure changes, about the demographic dividend issues. There's migration, forced voluntary migration. But I think the critical thing is that we can't really talk about sustainable development without looking at how people and the population dynamics are impacting and being impacted by climate change. Thank you very much. It's an ongoing discussion. We are out of here. Thank you.